Hey guys, welcome back to BasedMMA. In this video, I'm going to be building UFC 300. I know this pay-per-view is kind of far away. It's most likely going to take place sometime in April next year, guys. But I just wanted to make a video of potential matchups that I would love to see for UFC 300, guys. But before I get started, please make sure to like and subscribe, like the video, comment down below your perfect UFC 300 card. And I'm going to make a lot of assumptions with these matchups, right? Because we have a lot of matchups coming up where we still don't know who is going to end up winning that matchup. But I'm going to make some assumptions of what fighters are going to end up winning their matchups and what fighters I don't see fighting at UFC 300 due to timing, due to, you know what I'm saying, a lot of factors, guys. So starting off with UFC 300, the main event. Should I start from the main event or the main card? Starting with the first fight of the main card, I think should be Manel Cap versus Kai Kara France as a first fight of the main card for UFC 300. I think there's a lot of beef coming into this fight. Manel Cap has now become a very base fighter. We saw that that he got a lot of spotlight in that press conference at UFC 293. So I feel like a lot of people are high on Manel Cap. So I would love to see that matchup for UFC 300. I mean, I feel like that card is most likely going to take place sometime in April or maybe even late March. So I feel like it just makes sense to make Manel Cap versus Kai Kara France timing-wise. So I just think that it would be a great opener to the main card to have Manel Cap versus Kai Kara France, a very competitive fight. I personally would go with Manel Cap to win. I think he's just a little bit better than Kai Kara France. So a lot of momentum on this guy, and I think this guy's going to end up fighting for the title sometime soon. So I would make Manel Cap versus Kai Kara France as the first fight of the main card. I know it's not like a crazy matchup, but I still would love to see it for UFC 300. Now, moving on to the next fight in the main card that I believe should be after that, and that is Israel Adesanya versus Hamza Chimaev as a fourth fight of that card. I think it would be an incredible matchup. We know Israel Adesanya is not the champion anymore, so obviously I'm not going to put him as the main event or even the co-main event. I think he should be the fourth fight on the card. And the reason he's a fourth fight on the card is not because of name recognition whatsoever. It's because the next three fights on this card are going to be title fights. I just think it makes sense for UFC 300 to have three title fights. And I feel like it just makes sense, right? But I feel like Israel Adesanya versus Hamza Chimaev is a huge fight, man. It just makes sense for it to take place at UFC 300. We know that Israel Adesanya wants to take some time off. And obviously me putting him against Hamza Chimaev is me assuming that Hamza Chimaev is most likely going to beat Paulo Costa this October. So if Paulo Costa ends up pulling a big upset, I mean, this matchup kind of goes out the window, right? But I'm going to assume that Hamza Chimaev is going to be able to go through Paulo Costa fairly easily and fight sometime early next year. I think he's going to want to be active. You know, he hasn't fought in over a year. So I think Hamza Chimaev, if he gets a really good win over Paulo Costa, he's going to want to make a quick turnaround sometime in April, late March. So it just makes sense to make Israel Adesanya versus Hamza Chimaev for UFC 300. Like I said, it's the fourth fight on the main card. I know that might seem a little bit too ambitious for you guys, but I really do believe that the UFC is going to go all out with UFC 300. Now, another thing, I probably should have mentioned this before I start naming some of these matchups. I don't believe Conor McGregor is going to end up fighting at UFC 300, guys. I do believe that Conor McGregor is going to end up fighting Chandler sometime in January or February, but I think that fight is going to take place early next year. I think there's a reason why they did not announce Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera 2 for December. I think the UFC is going to want to make Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler and then have Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera 2 as a co-main event of that pay-per-view. And I think right now they're planning to do that sometime in January or February. I think we might get an announcement soon. But it just doesn't make sense timing-wise for UFC 300 for either Sean O'Malley to fight on that card or for Conor McGregor. So I just kind of want to prepare you guys. I'm not going to have Conor McGregor on this card. I'm not going to have Sean O'Malley on this card. I know most of you would probably put Conor McGregor somewhere in this card. But for me, I'm not going to put them on this card. And also, some of these fights are fights that I personally want to see, guys. Of course, I'm a little biased, and I'm putting fights on this card that I personally would be more excited for. But we'll see how it fits timing-wise, and we'll see who ends up winning these next pay-per-views. Because I mean, we got some big fights. We got Jones versus Stipe. We got Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. We got Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira. So whoever ends up winning those matchups is going to make a lot more sense for UFC 300 to see who is going to end up being on that card. I think even the prelims are going to be stacked, and I will talk a little bit about the prelims. But let's go to the third fight, and this is the first title fight on the main card of UFC 300. And for UFC 300, guys, the first title fight on this card will be Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje 2. I know a lot of you guys in the comments are going to say, oh, why are you putting Charles Oliveira? He's going to lose to Islam Makhachev. I'm telling you right now, Charles Oliveira is going to beat Islam Makhachev in the rematch, man. I'm just feeling it. Charles Oliveira is going to get it done. Now, I know I'm making Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje 2 for UFC 300, the third fight. The first title fight on that card. But I'm also going to give you another version. Let's say that Islam Makhachev ends up, defeating Charles Oliveira. It's a very competitive fight. Either guy could win, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that Islam Makhachev doesn't have a chance, so don't come back after October 21st to comment down below. No, you see Islam Makhachev won, blah, blah, blah. It's a very competitive fight. Islam Makhachev is incredibly well-run. But if Islam Makhachev ends up winning that fight, and Colby Covington also ends up winning that fight, let's see Islam Makhachev versus Colby Covington as the third fight of UFC 300. It just makes a lot of sense. Colby Covington recently talked about wanting to fight Islam Makhachev if both of them end up winning their matchups this later down this year. So I feel like it would be a great matchup to have a UFC 300, a very exciting fight. Islam Makhachev, potentially becoming double champ. And then you have Colby Covington making his first title defense against the second pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Islam Makhachev could easily be a welterweight, so it's not like, oh man, Colby Covington is fighting a smaller guy. I even think that Islam Makhachev is probably bigger than Colby Covington when they're not cutting weight, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like that would be a very exciting, but I'm going to assume, like I said, that Charles Oliveira will defeat Islam Makhachev, and it just makes Justin Gaethje, it makes sense for Justin Gaethje to fight the winner of that fight, so I'm going to make Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje 2. Incredible fight. I mean, the first fight was one of the best fights of 2022, so it just makes sense for them to run it back. Justin Gaethje has improved a lot since that last matchup. We saw his improvements against Fiziev, against Dustin Poirier, so it just makes sense for them to run it back when they end up winning. And the reason that I did not make one of the fights that I've been wanting to see personally is Charles Oliveira versus Volkanovski. That's like a fantasy that I would love to see, a UFC matchup that I would love for the UFC to make at some point. But the reason why I didn't put Volkanovski on this card is because I think Volkanovski is going to end up fighting in February or January against Topuria. So that's kind of why, timing-wise, it just kind of didn't make sense to have Volkanovski at UFC 300, which is why I'm not going to have him on this card also. I mean, Volkanovski versus Topuria would also make a lot of sense to have on this card. But like I said, when it comes to UFC 300, there's a lot of pay-per-views that we still have left to see who could end up fighting at UFC 300. So obviously I'm making a lot of assumptions. But I'm going to make Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje 2 for the third fight, the first title fight. So obviously it makes sense that the next title fights are in higher weight classes. So for the co-main event, I'm going to have Yuri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight title. And yeah, I know. You're probably assuming, well, what about Alex Pereira? You think he's going to lose? Yes, guys. I feel like Alex Pereira is going to end up losing against Yuri Prochazka. I know that Alex Pereira is a lot more technical, a lot better of a striker technically, but I just feel like Yuri Prochazka has such an orthodox style that I think he's going to drag Alex Pereira into a brawl, and I think he's going to end up finding the shot, man. I really think he's going to end up finding Alex Pereira's chin. And I just kind of didn't like how Alex Pereira looked against Jan Blachowicz on the feet. Like, I felt like Yuri Prochazka could capitalize, a lot more explosive, a lot younger, and I think he's going to end up fighting Pereira's chin. So I do believe that Yuri Prochazka is going to end up winning that fight at UFC 295. So it just makes sense to have Jamal Hill's return versus Yuri Prochazka as a co-main event of UFC 300. It's an incredible fight. It's a fight that I've been wanting to see. When I found out that Jamal Hill got injured, I was bummed because I really wanted to see Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prochazka. So it just kind of makes more sense to have that matchup as a co-main event of UFC 300. It's enough time for Yuri Prochazka to recover from any injuries he'll have in November. Jamal Hill will have enough time to recover from his injury. And then we could make that matchup as a co-main event. Explosive fight. I know you guys would love to see it. It's going to be a banger. Now for the main event of UFC 300, I know this fight isn't necessarily big in terms of like the casual viewer, but this is what I personally would love to have as a main event. This is a fight that I really want to see, and I feel like even if this fight is not on this card, it needs to be the main event of one of the early pay-per-views in 2024. And that is Tom Aspinall versus Sergey Pavlovich. I think that's the fight to make for UFC 300, the main event. I know that both of them are barely rising. They're not like household names, you know. They're not Conor McGregor. They're not Adesanya. But to have the main event of Tom Aspinall versus Sergey Pavlovich for UFC 300, for me would be incredibly exciting. Would be a fantastic card, guys. So yeah, that's my main card for UFC 300 with Manel Kape versus Brandon Moreno. We got Hamza Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya. We got Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje 2. We got Yuri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill. And then we got Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. I think that would be an incredible card for UFC 300. Now for the prelims, I'm gonna have the main fight of the prelims is going to be Bo Nickal versus Roman Kopylov. That's the fight to make. Roman Kopylov is on a good little win streak. Bo Nickal's undefeated. Hot prospect in the middleweight division. Let them go at it. That would be a fantastic fight. I would love to see it. And obviously, I would like to see Paul Felder versus Tony Ferguson. Jim Miller is also going to be on the prelims. We're going to stack those prelims, guys. But yeah, that is my main card for UFC 300. Let me know down in the comments below what kind of matchups you would love to see for UFC 300. And yeah, let me know down in the comments below, guys. I hope you guys are having a good day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.